This is a rebroadcast of the Eau Claire City Council meeting. The audio for this program can be heard on WRFP LP 101.9 FM.
This meeting of the Eau Claire City Council will come to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Duax.
Here.
Emmanuel. Kincaid.
Here.
Klinkhammer.
Here.
Larson.
Here.
Lewis.
Here.
Mitchell. Strobel.
Here.
Von Hayden.
Here.
Worthman. Zhang.
Here.
Thank you, Madam City Clerk, and welcome everyone to the Monday, January 13th, 2014 session of the Eau Claire City Council. During its Monday night session, the Council conducts public hearings and holds public discussions in which we seek your input for our decisions that we make during our legislative session, which tomorrow will convene in this room at 4 p.m. Tonight, the Council will be considering some important matters regarding a site plan amendment or an amendment to the procedure we use for site plans. We'll be considering some improvements to our intergovernmental relationships with the town of Washington, an issue that we've worked very hard on for the last 6 years. We also will be hearing some proposed changes to Carson Park, a beloved public entity in our community, and have a good discussion and hear some good input about those proposed changes that are coming before Council. We welcome citizens, of course, who are joining us tonight in chambers, and those of you who are streaming at cvctv.org and watching on community television. The channel just escaped me. I forget the 994, I think. Is that right? Yes, I'm getting the thumbs up. 994 on cable channel. For those of you who wish to speak tonight, I'll just briefly review the protocol. We introduce an item before Council, and then there's oftentimes a report by staff and filling us in about background and information that we need. And then I will call for public input about that certain item. If you're interested in speaking, you may approach the podium. We do institute a 5-minute speaking limit. It helps us be fair to everyone, and it helps the meeting move along, quite frankly. You will note the 5 minutes as you're speaking by a green light. When you have 1 minute left, the light turns yellow, and when your 5 minutes are up, the light will turn to red. I will also remind you that your 5 minutes are up and then politely ask you to bring your comments to a close. Often, however, there are questions after you're done with your comments, so you have another chance to expand on your thoughts. So if you wouldn't mind staying at the podium for just a little bit until I ask if there are questions, and then we'll take questions from Council. We don't mean to, and we don't ever drill you or embarrass you. We're just trying to find out what your point of view is and what is the information that you're bringing before us. So we have a very high standard of how we treat citizens during the Council meetings. Lastly, you do not have to take 5 minutes, but they are there for you should you need them. If you really have a message for us that you would like us to get and you don't want to speak, there are blue comment sheets at the back of chambers. You could fill out your comment, and we receive that input before tomorrow's meeting also. And they are equally weighed with all of the spoken, is that the right word? Yeah, spoken comments, I guess. So to check with my grammarian over here. Okay. That was a long introduction. If you have any problems, you can ask Ms. Merle, who sits right here. She'll be very happy to help you. So let's get on with our first agenda item. I have to use your sheet here. The first agenda item on our agenda tonight is a public hearing regarding a zoning code amendment, and it is on. Oh, Mr. City Manager, I'm just droning away here.
Thank you so much.
Right now you want it, yeah.
That's okay. No
Sorry.
problem. I wanted to introduce to City Council our new city engineer who joined our organization. You'll come to know Dave Solberg, who is our city engineer. He will be the face of the organization for our public works projects, and he's busy working with staff to get those things underway. So, Dave, if you want to just stand up, and our new city engineer is Dave Solberg.
Oh, thank you for reminding me. We just talked about that like 3 minutes ago, and then I totally forgot. So it's really tough being in your 60s. For those of you who aren't yet, some of you are nodding and saying, yeah. Okay, we'll get back to business, and welcome, Mr. Solberg. Our first agenda item is an ordinance amending the site plan chapter of the zoning code allowing administrative approval of certain minor site plans. Mr. Tufte.
I would note it's my 58th birthday today, so I got a couple of years before the
We've known each
60th
other
concern.
long enough that I know that's true, so.
Oops. There we go. This amendment was initiated by Plan Commission. I'd point out a site plan is an administrative approval for permitted uses under zoning code provisions. So there's no public hearing notice. There's no public hearing before the Plan Commission in the review of site plans because of how it is set up in a zoning code. The present provisions of our zoning code distinguish between a major site plan and a minor site plan. This amendment does move one of those provisions, a rooming house review, by amendment to become a major site plan, so it would continue to be reviewed by Plan Commission. And we don't see many rooming houses anymore. I think we haven't seen one now for at least 10 years, but they used to be fairly common. Minor site plans then under the provisions of the code involve alterations or changes that increase the parking from 2 to 5 stalls, and that primarily becomes under the terms or the type of development we see in the community, duplex. And this is a typical duplex site plan that we see in our community. It has front-facing double garages. We look at landscaping, tapered driveways, sidewalks, setbacks, things such as that. And the front appearance of the duplex we also look at in terms of each unit must have a front-facing door, a porch, a window. The garage must have some type of an offset and some type of masonry, partial masonry siding. The second type of a minor site plan that we see occasionally is a drive-up facility. And this is an example of a drive-up facility. Most drive-up facilities come with a new restaurant. A new restaurant is a major site plan, so it's going to go to the Plan Commission. But occasionally we get a drive-up facility within an existing building. This is the Holiday Mega Convenience Store off Fairfax and Claremont Avenue. And Urberts and Gerberts converted the back part of that space for a drive-up facility. So this is the type of a site plan that we could administratively approve under this amendment. And the third type of a minor site plan then is an addition to an existing parking lot. Parking lots within residential districts are going to be a conditional use permit. They're going to go to Plan Commission. Parking lots with new development, they're tied to new development. They're going to go to Plan Commission. But occasionally we just get a business that wants to expand its parking lot because they're adding employees. And this is an example of one in Sky Park where they wanted to expand their parking lot, and we could then administratively approve that addition. This amendment allows zoning administrator to approve these minor site plans. Applicant may request they go to Plan Commission. And what that means is if applicant and staff don't agree on an approval, we're going to take it to Plan Commission like an appeal and let the Plan Commission make that decision. We do believe this amendment will save some time for staff and applicant, and Plan Commission has recommended its approval.
Thank you, Mr. Tufte. Questions? Councilmember Von Hayden?
Mr. Tufte, the question that I have is you showed a picture of that duplex with the front-facing garages, et cetera.
Now, the design and the standard, that would be set by Planning Commission.
Yes.
The staff would be just carrying out based on what Planning Commission says is the standard.
Yes, these standards are already established in the city's multifamily housing design manual, and we'd be simply following that manual, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Mitchell?
Thank you. I don't have a question, but do you mind if I give a little background to this? Or
Sure.
should I wait till tomorrow? Okay. When we were doing the health chapter of the comprehensive plan, we were invited by the Home Builders Association to meet with them. And that night, the discussion digressed considerably from that topic to other issues regarding planning. And the home builders requested that the city might consider this change. And so I actually asked for it before the Plan Commission on my own behalf, but kind of on their behalf. So it was something that came not from the Plan Commission directly, but from the community, and then proceeded from there.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. Councilmember Duex?
Am I reading this correctly or not? I don't see where there's a definition that redefines or defines what major site plan is versus minor. Is it somewhere else?
There's no definition per se. There's just a standard in the actual ordinance that distinguishes between major site plan, A, B, and C, and minor site plan, A, B, and C. And those definitions have been in code since 1986.
Well, okay, so, but here's what it says. Major site plans shall be required for new development, defined as follows. Any construction, blah, 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 any development, blah, blah, blah. And then I go to minor site plans, any construction, addition, alteration, or change in the use of occupancy which increases the parking. I'm reading those two together, and I don't see a side-by-side comparison, you know what I mean?
The major site plan it increases the parking by 5 or more stalls. The minor site plan, it changes the parking from 2 to 5 stalls. And that's the basic way in which you determine if a site plan is required, is if it changes the parking requirement. For example, the parking requirement for a retail use is 4 parking stalls per 1,000 square feet. So under this provision right now, we can approve an addition up to 500 square feet, and this amendment would say we can approve a retail addition up to 1,250 square feet administratively.
Well, but looking at that one example you had of the drive-in, drive-through, I'm sorry, I'm trying to figure out, okay, how did that become a minor? You said that was minor now?
Yes. This project, which was a convenience store for Mega, is a major site plan because it's a retail space over the 5 required parking stalls. They came in then after this building was built and asked to convert that back space into the Herberts and Gerberts. It didn't change the required parking. The parking still remains the same, but it did add a drive-up facility, which adds stacking requirements, and that's why that is considered a minor site plan.
Well, I'm following that, but what I'm trying to figure out is then why, you know, that would mean that anything they did to that building, let's say they completely gutted it and made it into something else, and if the parking requirement is still the same, then it's minor, right?
In reality, it's not a site plan. We see that very often in this community. A good example is Shields Hardware out in Oakwood Mall. They made a major conversion of millions of dollars inside of Oakwood Mall, and it's simply changing retail space to other retail space, and it's not reviewed as a site plan. It's simply building permits are issued.
Okay, so the driving factor is always parking.
Yes, anytime you add a drive-up device, it becomes a minor site plan because you're storing more vehicles on the site.
Or major, if it's over 5. Yeah, so it's major. So I was trying to get that distinction, what triggers that, and it's just parking, nothing else.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tufti. No one else? Did you? Okay.
It's
Okay.
probably.
Councilmember Strobel?
Thank you. How did the Plan Commission vote on this? It's probably
It was 6-1.
Okay, I see no further questions, and thank you, Mr. Tufti. Are there members of the public here who are interested in talking about this proposed site plan change? Anyone here for item 1? Seeing none, the chair will close item 1, bring our attention to item 2, which is a discussion of another proposed change in the future land use map within the intergovernmental agreement with the town of Washington for property at 5791 Friedeck Road. Mr. Tufti.
This property is located on the south end of Friedeck Road, which is the east frontage road on the east side of Highway 93 as you head south of the city of Eau Claire. This property presently is zoned rural residential and designated the same under the town's comprehensive plan. And the town has received a request to rezone the property and amend its comprehensive plan to designate a portion of this property commercial. And we put in your packet the application forms and other materials that were received from the town. Under the agreement between the city and the town, there is a map that also designates certain areas, residential, commercial, etc. And that map is based on the town's comprehensive plan. Thus, anytime the town changes its comprehensive plan map, it's also changing the map within the agreement. And our agreement says that they can't change the commercial designations on that map unless there's concurrence from the city, and that's why the item is before you. Basically, what the applicant is proposing is to take their 10-acre site, which does have a residence on it, and there are residents to the south, but there are commercial properties across Highway 93 to the west, and rezone a portion of that property, 3.2 acres, for commercial, and then the remainder would still remain rural residential. Now, also in your packet then is the map from the agreement we have with the town. And this is basically the map that the town has for their comprehensive plan. This site is located here, and again, it's presently zoned rural residential. They'd like to designate it, at least a portion of it, commercial. The city previously considered a site similar to this up on the north side of Friedeck Road, and did concur that that could be changed to commercial. And the basis of that is the city's comprehensive plan. This is the map the city has within our comprehensive plan, and we show this site as being commercial in our comprehensive plan, as we did show the previous site located up on the north end of Friedeck. Under the concurrence provisions we have in our agreement, we basically leave the public input in terms of neighborhood concerns with this type of situation to the town and the county, since they're going to have public hearings and those folks live in their jurisdiction. What you're here to basically decide is, do you concur with the change as it pertains to the maps within the agreement? The maps also, or the proposal also will be subdividing the property into 2 lots. And the Plan Commission has already approved that subdivision of this property into 2 lots under the infill provisions of our agreement. What the council's asked to do is, do you concur with the change in a portion of this to commercial? And the Plan Commission has recommended that change. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Tufti. Councilmember Duex has a question.
Yes, could you put up the map from the city comprehensive plan that you just had up? Yes. Under the Highway 93 highway shield, is that a continuous pink area there?
No, there are gaps, particularly as you head south.
Well, north of there.
North.
Is that underneath that sign?
That's a good question.
Ah.
It's a real good question. I have in my office a map without that sign on. I actually do believe there's a gap there because there are some existing residents in that location.
There might be.
And I do think on the west side, I think the county does own property as part of the park that goes right out to the highway. So I do think there is a gap there.
Yes. So that wouldn't change that. It's just that small area that we colored in.
Yeah.
When the town has a town rezoning, or the county Committee on Planning and Development has a hearing on this requested change, all the residents out there will then be notified, I take it, into their system. The purpose of our public discussion tonight is then what?
The applicant is here, and they may want to comment, and that's normally why we put it on a Monday night.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I see no further questions. Councilmember Mitchell?
Thank you. But what we're doing here is is part of a policy or a process that we've started whereby when a request comes forward, we're interested in changing the map so that the agreement stays solid, whereas the request for the rezoning is something that the town is going to have to deal with themselves.
Correct. You're considering an amendment to a map that's attached to an agreement. And under the terms of that agreement, the city is asked, do you concur with this? This may be a situation where they're asking for a concurrence for property that we haven't designated as commercial under our comprehensive plan, and the council may say, we don't concur with this. And under the terms of the agreement, then the town would say, we don't agree, we're not going to approve this rezoning.
But we've done this before, and we'll be doing it again.
This is the second one now that we've had. Both have come from the town of Washington. We are expecting one shortly to come in with the town of Wheaton. So we've had numerous infill development lot splits come in through Plan Commission under the terms of the agreement. And I should state to council the terms are working very well in terms of how they're being implemented. There are also numerous applications that come to our office, and as we explain to the applicants that they will not likely get approved, the applicants understand that, and they're not going through the process. So it's working well, the agreement.
Each time we see an item, it's a good test of those agreements that we hammered out.
Mm-hmm.
So it's good.
Yeah.
Oh, Councilmember Duff?
A follow-up question with respect to that. Are we seeing then, as this starts to unfold within the intergovernmental agreement that was signed pursuant to the comprehensive plan, are we seeing then a fulfillment of the ultimate objective, which is to have orderly change and growth on our boundaries that does not affect our sewer and water obligations? In other words, we're continuing to have orderly, compact development. Is that?
We have a growth management strategy in place that will limit the amount of septic system and well development occurring within the city sewer service area, which will allow for a more orderly expansion of our utilities in the long term. It'll take many years for that to occur, but it is happening, yes.
Good, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tufte. You mentioned the applicant is here?
Yes.
Welcome.
Jamie Radabaugh, 306 Jefferson Street, Eau Claire. And I work for Commonweal Development. We represent the landowners here. We've listed it for probably about a year or more, and we've had a few inquiries. There's been a little bit of confusion on whether the property is commercial or it's residential or what it is. I mean, the actual zoning is commercial and agricultural on the property currently. So I guess we decided that it'd be best to try to get that ambiguity out of the way, bring this forward, and try to get the maps to align a little further. Let me see. In kind of laying this out, we did our best to minimize the commercial and to avoid any, I guess, imposing burdens on the existing residential houses here and do commercial up in front on the highway side. And I leave it for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Radabaugh. Questions, anybody? I see none. Thank you for your work.
Yep.
Are there other members of the public here to speak to this item? Anyone else? Seeing no one, the chair will close item 2. Move our attention to item 3 on our agenda, which is a discussion of the request from the Eau Claire Express to add fan deck seating in the baseball stadium grandstand and a corresponding expansion of the Class B fermented malt beverage and Class C wine license to Eau Claire Baseball, LLC, doing business as Eau Claire Express. Mr. Koala, welcome.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Phil couldn't be here tonight, so he asked me if I would speak to this project. In your package, you You have a cover sheet and an introductory letter from Eau Claire Baseball to construct two fan decks in the baseball stadium at Carson Park. The dimensions of these decks are 25 by 9.5, and they would occupy, oh, thank you. They would occupy space in the stadium itself on the first base side of the field, the right field side, and another one to match on the left field line, down the third base line. This is a photograph of the existing conditions in the stadium in the proposed location, generally in this area, and this is a rendition of what Eau Claire Express is proposing. The two bleacher seats would be removed to allow for the deck that you see here, with seating reallocated or reappropriated in such a way where there's the same amount of seats here in front of the railing, and then I would imagine bar stools or something at this serving table back here. And we had this proposal was before the Waterways and Parks Committee in October.
Mr. Qualo, do you mind if I interrupt you just a moment to wonder if the mics are on? Right there. I think the red light went out sometime during the last speaker.
Is that better?
That's better.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Sorry for the interruption.
No, that's okay. This proposal was before the Waterways and Parks Committee in October. The proposal passed with a 7-5 vote. It was also in front of the Landmarks Commission with recommendation from that committee to wait for the response from the Wisconsin Historical Society for their input. And there's the Wisconsin Historical Society had indicated they would wish to see photographs of the conditions before and noted the conditions before the project as and this committee did not endorse nor disapprove the project, but that was their conditions were they wanted photographic documentation, and Pat Ivory had sent that to that organization as well, and their responses in the packet as well. And I believe there may be others here to speak to this. Mr. Roulette is here for some questions in detail, and I'd be happy to entertain any questions you may have for me.
Thank you, Mr. Qualo. We'll see if there doesn't. Councilmember Lewis?
Yes, thank you. The same amount of seating is still going to remain when this is done?
Correct. That's my understanding. This is essentially, Ms. Lewis, is a wash. These bleacher seats would come out, but it would be reallocated in this area, and then with seating behind this serving table as well.
And where is the proposed food and drink going to be served that would be up there? Do you know that?
It would be served on the deck. It would be prepared at the same location, I assume, where they're at the outfield deck.
Oh, and then it's just being brought over there?
That's my understanding. And I think Mr. Roulette might be able to speak to that.
All right, thank you.
I'll just leave these up here.
I see no further questions. That would be helpful if you would
Sure.
leave them. Mr. Roulette? If you don't mind stating your name and your address for the record.
I'm Bill Roulette. I don't live in Eau Claire any longer. I'm in the town of Springbrook on the Chippewa River, about 15 miles west of here. But I think that I know some of you. Maybe I should give you a little background on who I am and why I stand before you and why I've stood before the council for over 30 years. I don't know if this is a positive thing to say, but I think that it's safe to say that I've probably spent more time at the Carson Park Baseball Stadium than anybody in the history of Eau Claire. It doesn't lead for a very balanced life, but I have a pretty good working relationship in terms of the changes and the upgrades that have taken place at the stadium. I'm a baseball fan first, The reason I bring this up is that as I've gone before committees in the past, there have been concerns and accusations and statements, quite frankly, about the honesty that we've taken as we approached the committees with regards to the improvements that we've made at the park, accusations that we've been responsible for the destruction and takedown of trees. And it's somewhat disturbing when I hear that, but they're statements that are made by committee members. And I just want to bring to your light the fact that everything that we've ever presented to you and will in the future is according to specifications, and the designs that we've got have been in place to give you as good an idea as possible as to what we're doing at the park and why we're doing it. The question was raised about food service. I don't know how well this works, but the back row of the stadium is a bench. There's no bleacher seating there. We're going to have it set up there to where we've got the ability to serve off of that platform area with heaters. The food will be prepared outside. We've got catered suppliers of food. This is our opportunity to present our fan base in those platform decks with food outside of the stadium. For anybody that comes to the park, they know that our stadium menus are essentially bratwurst, hamburgers, and hot dogs, and for the most part that's acceptable. But when we get people coming out on the deck, they're looking for something different. You know, the media hasn't been particularly kind to us. They've, from day one, have alluded to the fact that we're expanding the fan deck. That couldn't be further from the truth. This is a separate area that's going to be identified as stadium platform decks. I've had to answer questions regarding an all-you-can-eat and drink concept. It's interesting because in the letters that I've sent to the city, two in particular, we've never referenced all-you-can-eat and drink. So somebody obviously is running with that concept. But I'm here to answer any questions, concerns that you may have, certainly that the community may have. I guess that's about it.
Thank you, Mr. Roulette. I'll see if there are questions. Councilmember Lewis?
Sure. Thank you.
A question for you, sir.
Since you brought it up, that is exactly what I've heard, that this was similar to the fan deck, that it was going to be an all-you-can-eat, all-you-can-drink. And one of the questions I had for you, what was the model there for how that's going to be rented, what the food and the drink circumstances would be there, what kind of a model you envisioned that would go on that deck?
Well, as I mentioned, the food will come from outside of the stadium. We've presently secured one business partner, Mike Smokehouse, that will be providing food on one of the decks, possibly both. People who, and we're limited to 20 people up there. So people who sign up will essentially select from a menu whether they want pulled pork, pulled beef, side orders of coleslaw, beans, spuds. You folks have all been to Mike's, you know what their menus are. We provide dessert items and beverage items. We have soda and water in bottle form and beer in tap form. We'll have a kegerator up there. I can tell you this, as we've gone before the expanded liquor license committee, the question was raised, how much do we anticipate going through in terms of beer? And from our experiences on our platform decks on the fan deck, not the fan deck itself, but the elevated platform decks that accommodate anywhere from 25 to 40 people, we go through about a half a barrel of beer a night. And I got those figures from our stadium intern operator that was responsible for seeing to it that we had product on the elevated decks last year. Does that answer your question?
Councilmember Zhang?
Thank you, Madam President. Excuse me. This area, is it restricted for adult only, or, I mean, minor can be?
We'll handle, no, it's not. We'll handle that in much the same fashion that we do our fan deck. We will ban people who are going into that area on a given night. And I should point out, we're not going to be reserving this fan deck each and every night. In the best case scenario, we will. But this is something not unlike the fan deck itself, where people are going to have to come and experience it, and then I think it'll grow with word of mouth in terms of what's available, what we're providing to our fan base. But that's part of why we have the water and soda available, because if they're not banded, then that indicates that they're not of age. We will have an attendant on that deck that'll be overseeing the serving of the food and the distribution of the beverage. And they will be licensed, certainly know how to check for proper IDs if that should come into play. On nights that we're not reserving this area, it'll be open to the public. So if you and your spouse come out to the park and it's not in use, you're welcome to go up there if you've got a reserved grandstand seat and sit in chairs as opposed to the customary bleacher seat area. I'd like to point out, too, that in the removal of the bench seats, we're taking out what we put in. I was involved with the stadium renovation project, and we ran short of money in our efforts to put bleacher seating in all of the stadium. And so as we started the Express and saw the need for additional seating, we put those bleacher seats in. This is a calculated move on our part. I think I've stood before you in the past and indicated that the Northwoods League is basically a copycat league. If it works in La Crosse, if it works in Madison, if it works in other affiliate communities and stadiums, we're foolish not to try it here. If we were selling these seats out on a regular basis, there'd be no question that we wouldn't be putting platform decks in there. But with the possible exception of the 4th of July and a couple of other well-attended sponsorship nights, these seats are randomly seated in, but they're not seated on a daily basis. So this is our attempt to get more people into the grandstand area. Question was raised, is it going to be a potential disturbance for people seated in the reserved grandstand area? We don't believe so. Just in what we've seen in other stadiums, in how our fan deck has been operated, we feel that it'll nest well with those people. And folks, if it doesn't work, we'll be the first ones to identify with that. And the construction that we're looking at here is not permanent. There's nothing that we're putting in there that can't be taken out. From a structural standpoint, we're doing nothing to disrupt the stadium as it's presently laid out.
Thank you. Lots of lights. I saw Councilmember Larson, I believe, first.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify, follow up on a question from Councilmember Lewis, because there seems to be some question about it. Will the fans who go on the deck there have available to them all you can drink based on their ticket purchase?
And based on what we supply them. They will have a barrel of beer in a kegerator. Okay. And as I indicated, historically speaking, we don't go through an entire keg of beer in the course of a ball game. But if they run out, they run out. And I should point out, too, we'll operate this in much the same way we do on the fan deck, in that when they come onto that platform deck, they'll get one cup. And it's intended to restrict them somewhat from the amount of beverage that they go through at a given time. At the same time, as we do on the fan deck, 7th inning, we'll notify them that we're cutting off the beer. The soda and water will still be available, but we do the best that we can to control the environment when it comes to the consumption of alcohol within the stadium.
Councilmember Duex?
Mr. Roulette, you indicated that you had not said at any time that this was all you can eat, all you can drink.
No.
At the Waterways and Parks Commission, I believe you did present that was the standard at the fan deck, that it's all you can eat, all you can drink for a set fee.
I indicated at that time, when asked how the food and beverage would be served, that it was very similar to the fan deck, yes.
Yes, and then you did say it was all you can eat, all you can drink.
I don't recall that, Mr. Duex, but...
If someone asked you how much does the average person drink, do you recall what your answer was at that time?
No, but I can tell you that it would probably be in the neighborhood of 4 to 5 beers over a 3-hour period.
I believe at the Waterways and Parks Commission, and I was present, you said 7 to 8.
I don't believe so.
I would be willing to ask others, and there probably would be other people.
Well, that's fine.
Okay,
That's fine.
and the cups, by the way, how big are they? How many ounces?
They are 16-ounce cups.
Thank you.
Councilmember Mitchell? Sorry, thank you.
Mr. Rowlett, do you have plans for doing more construction in the stadium? Do you have some kind of a master plan for that, or?
Ms. Mitchell, if I could quote my wife, she said, you've been spending money up there. Why don't you start making money? We've probably put close to $750,000 worth of improvements into that facility since the startup of the Eau Claire Express. Do we have plans? At the present time, no. But I guess historically speaking, it would indicate that if we see something that we feel is going to improve the stadium, improve the experience of people coming to a game, we might consider it. But at my age, and in reference to Ms. Kincaid, I wish I was in my 60s, but I'm not. I've been involved with just about every major improvement within the stadium in the past 30 years, from field turf to dugouts to restrooms. And I find it interesting. I don't believe the city turned the stadium into a historical landmark until after we made the improvements. The question has always been raised, what can we do? And I've always been of the opinion that we can make improvements within the stadium as long as we don't disturb the aesthetic beauty of the exterior of the stadium. And Mr. Nix, I would encourage you to check on my assumptions. But I believe that to be factual. I hear people tell me about what a great facility it is. And how they saw Hank Aaron play. Well, I was there to see Hank Aaron play, but at the same time, I was there in my period of time with the Cavaliers when any night that we had over 1,000 people in attendance, we had water and more than water running out of both restrooms into the hallways. It was a sad state of affairs before we renovated the stadium in the late 90s. And we're hopeful that there'll be improvements beyond where we're at now, but probably not within the actual stadium itself.
Thank you, Mr. Roulette. I see a couple more questions, so we'll take a couple more. Councilmember Strobel?
Thank you, Mr. Roulette. It seems like you're sort of applying your same business model to this as you are in the fan deck out in the outfield. Is that? And I guess my question there is it full out there? Is that why you're doing this in this particular location, or why this particular location? Some of the concerns I'm getting from folks, as you sort of mentioned already, are the potential, maybe abuse of alcohol in this situation where the other fans are sitting, and so I wonder why you're splitting that up.
From the deck standpoint, from the elevated platform decks, where we reserve groups, and if you noticed in your packet, I went to people who have supported us through that concept since day one, and I think they've indicated to you how well received it's been, at least from their experiences on the fan deck. We feel we've got available space to provide smaller groups with the same opportunity to entertain business associates, family, you name it. 20 people is not a large group, and when we have 20 people looking to have a reserved section on the fan deck itself, it becomes extremely difficult when we've got the elevated decks already booked. We have to cordon off seating for these people, and oftentimes it's a first come, first serve when they get there. We've had to change our policy to where they have to be seated in their seats before the game starts, or they lose their seat. And that's understandable because many times they'll come out there and they don't sit, they stand and socialize.
If I could follow up.
Yes.
So in order to have one of these areas that maybe is a little more intimate with maybe 20 people and stuff, is there not room a little further out along the right field line for something like that?
No.
Is that the deal?
No, there isn't.
Councilmember Lewis?
Yes. When it comes to people exiting and entering up here, they're going to have a ticket to get upstairs, right? If you come up through the regular grandstand, if they want to go down, use restrooms, go visit other people or anything, they're going to go down through the regular grandstand seating?
It's located right on an aisleway, yes.
Okay. And then are they allowed to take their glass of beer with them, or do they have to leave their glass up there while they exit?
In much the same fashion as the fan deck, when they leave that elevated platform deck, the cup stays there.
Okay. Do they get a new cup when they come back?
No, they do not.
That you get one cup and that's it?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
You know, the concern, I believe you addressed it, about the potential for disturbing people within the grandstand area. And these are the people that we cater to because for the most part, they're buying season tickets. And we're quite confident that the people on the elevated platform decks are not going to be a disturbance to people down below. If that were the case, we'd be in a position to lose business. And this is a business decision. At the same time, if you can visualize the concept of being on a deck, we're essentially charging people before they come to the park to get the food and beverage. In much the same fashion, when you come to the park and you decide to sit in a box seat or a reserved grandstand seat, we provide you with the food and beverage. It's just you pay for it as you get it. So it's, what would you say, pay me now or pay me later concept when it comes to reserving these seats.
Councilmember Klinkhammer.
Mr. Roulette?
Yes.
Looking at those pictures, are there going to be grandstand seats that are going to have impaired sidelines to the field by the construction of these decks?
I don't believe so, David. If so, it might be one or two. And again, we would address that in much the same fashion as we do now with the sale of seats. As you can see, we've got a number of pylons in the stadium itself that present the problem of obstructed views and limited views, but we don't anticipate that as a problem.
Thank you.
Councilmember Strobel.
And just one more question.
Yes.
Is it in our rules or ordinances or whatever, when you're serving the beer up there, that you do have to have somebody up there like a bartender all the time, or is that not? I mean, you can't just set a keg up there and
No,
say,
you
see you
cannot.
later?
No, you cannot. It's my understanding, and I've been trained as a bartender as well, that if you have a licensed bartender on the premise, that's sufficient. We could have somebody monitoring that deck that's not licensed, but they have to have access to a licensed bartender. We find it much easier just to license that person so that they don't have to leave that area to get assistance. They don't have to get on the headphone and call for assistance. They can handle the problem or any problem that comes up. And I think when you're talking about problems, you're talking about the potential for underage drinking. And I should point out, too, as I was attending the committee meeting for the expanded license, the question was raised about the fan deck, how it's policed, if it's policed. And we were very, we feel we're doing our job. But it was very rewarding to hear a member of that committee, Kyle Roeder, who was representing the police and fire department, had at his disposal records of calls to the stadium over the 9-year period since we've been in operation. And he indicated in that period of time there have been 5 calls for police assistance to the park, only 2 of which involved an express game. And of those 2 calls, neither involved overuse of intoxicants. I think that's a pretty good track record.
Thank you again, Mr. Roulette, for your lengthy story. Are there other members of the public who wish to speak to this item?
Good evening. As you know, I am the Health Department Director, Elizabeth Giese. I'm at 3455 Halsey Street. I'm also a parent of 4 children, and I'm here to share some public health information for you on this topic for you to consider as you look at the questions before you. Unsafe alcohol use is a concern in our community. And what I'm sharing with you is really about the health issues, not about the construction issues that you're seeing. It's something that Healthy Communities, the Eau Claire community group that got together last spring, identified as one of the top 3 health priorities in our community based on the data and based on perception about what needed to happen to create a healthier community. But it's also based on hard data that we have in public health, data that tells us that Wisconsin has issues with alcohol use, that Eau Claire specifically does. And in Eau Claire, we know we are ranked 7th in the state for binge drinking. So the concern brought to you today is really about alcohol use in this public spot. Why should you care? There are health implications, clearly, to alcohol use, but there's also financial implications in our community to this. You may have seen a report this summer that looked at the cost of alcohol misuse, and that's use by underage drinkers, that's the binge drinking by adults, and use by pregnant women. Costs $1,624 a year to every resident in this community for the health care, for the law enforcement, for all of those costs related to alcohol misuse. There were 19 alcohol-related deaths in 2012 in Eau Claire, over 1,800 arrests related to alcohol in Eau Claire. So it is a significant issue. Your community cares about it. I share with you, and we'll see if you can see this. We recently worked with Healthy Communities to post I don't know if you'll be able to make that as more visible than this, but Eau Claire Healthy Communities did come up with a web page that posted data. And this is just a quick visual for you of some of the data for Eau Claire County. The red on here is data that looks concerning. And if you scroll down, you see diabetes is farther down. This is actually green in these scales versus the red that you see for alcohol use. All of those areas are of concern to the community. So I share that with you as a piece of information, a piece of data. We know that drinking is a concern. I did a quick calculation related to a keg of beer, and if my math is correct, a keg of beer has close to 1,700 ounces in it. For 20 people, a keg of beer would result in about 84 ounces per person. Okay, just so you hear that math, if I'm calculating correctly. And so one of the things, again, that is concerning is that if you look at this graph, the legal driving limit is at 0.08 for alcohol use. If someone consumes, a female at 150 pounds consumes 2 16-ounce of some sort of alcohol, beer being an example, they're under the legal drinking limit. But at 3, a woman at 150 pounds would be over. So to get a sense of ounces calculated next to legal driving limit, this gives you a visual of what that might look like. Clearly, at 7 drinks at the 16-ounce level, you're at considerably over the legal drinking age, the drinking limit. The last thing I want to share with you is that we do know policy can make a difference in health, and there are national and state resources available to us to tell us about making policy decisions that will make a difference in binge drinking, in misuse of alcohol. There are certainly lots of evidence available to us, again, at a national level, that shows us that setting a different standard, things like having limits on drink levels, having a pay per drink, does decrease use. Unlimited alcohol use, things like you frequently hear about happy hour with unlimited alcohol availability, very clearly has been shown based on the evidence to increase use. So again, there are policy decisions that do make a difference in alcohol consumption. So I bring that to you, both the data and the evidence that it's available to public health practitioners, myself included, and tell you that it's an issue in our community to consider. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Giese. I see no questions. Oh, no.
I was going to.
Good evening.
Hi, good evening. I'm Dave Hoban, 3438 Sharon Drive, and I've been at that address for about 30 years. I don't do real well with being timed. I'm terrible at catchphrase. You just get real anxious and nervous, so bear with me. All right. I'm here to kind of speak against expanding the liquor license at the ballpark. And just to give you a little bit of background on myself, not to be bragging about it, but to let you know what my experience and knowledge base from which I speak. I've been working in the drug and alcohol field for about 30 years. I'm currently up at CVTC as an instructor in the drug and alcohol program for those that want to be drug and alcohol counselors. And I'm also a member of the Healthy Communities Alcohol Action Team. So I've got quite a bit of experience with regard to alcohol abuse and alcohol issues. I want to make it real clear, though, that I'm not anti-alcohol. That's not what this is all about. Most of my family and friends, they still drink alcohol, they still enjoy alcohol. So that's not it at all. But my concern comes to when we kind of cross that line and get into what's commonly referred to as binge drinking, in which you start to get into high-risk behavior choices related to excessive consumption of alcohol. And I appreciate what Mr. Roulette had said about it's not going to be unlimited, but even by the numbers that he gave with regard to 4 to 5 cups of beer, 16-ounce cups of beer, that by definition constitutes binge drinking. And with binge drinking, you cross that point to where you start to, it impacts this part of the brain, the executive function, if you will, which controls our behavior. It also is responsible for decision making and judgment. So, and this isn't, I'm not talking about alcoholics or anything like that. I'm talking about anybody, that drinks alcohol to the point of that impairment. It is going to affect those abilities. And And that's where you get to the point to where I talked about a little bit about high-risk behaviors can occur, and you start to getting into that, drinking and driving, and doing other things that are risky, unsafe behaviors. And on a real practical level, I don't imagine there's too many people in this room that haven't done something that they've regretted as a result of excessive consumption of alcohol. So that's my primary concern for any policy that kind of expands basically, the availability of binge drinking, and in some respects kind of condones it in that regard. And as Liska had mentioned too, it's harmful. It's certainly harmful to the drinker. If it's prolonged binge drinking, there's hardly an organ system in our body that is not adversely affected by the alcohol. Other ways, you see it in the paper every day with persons arrested for drinking and driving, and and other alcohol-related problems. It just really it's harmful to the drinker, and it becomes harmful to the drinker and to the family members and to the other loved ones, and to the people in the community, the innocent people in the community, if they're the victim of a drinking driving situation or something like that. So it's just I think it's sending the wrong message is the bottom line as far as I'm concerned. And when the opportunity presented itself, I joined that alcohol action team because, I mentioned I've been in Eau Claire for 34 years, but I've been concerned about the binge drinking that occurs in our community, in our county, and hopefully by being part of the alcohol action team, we were looking at trying to reduce the binge drinking and encouraging what we refer to as low-risk behavior as it relates to drinking. Some people might refer to it more as responsible drinking. But that's what we're trying to encourage. And so I would like to think that we could send a different message. Whether the FANDEC is approved or not approved, I don't think that that's going to change the binge drinking picture in Eau Claire significantly. But the part of the message that I think we could be sending would be more along the lines that we want you to go to the park. We want you to go to the park. We want you to have fun. We want you to eat. We want you to drink. But we want you to do it safely. We want you to do it safely for yourself and for the rest of the community. That's all I have. Thank you. Questions?
Thank you, Mr. Hoppen. You did well. I see no questions.
Okay, and I didn't get buzzed. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Good evening.
Evening.
My name is Jim Dunning. I live at 164 Wold Court in Eau Claire. And for those of you who were at the county legislative meeting this morning, I'm not giving the whole thing. Many of you heard what I've got to say, or part of it anyway, or more than what I'm going to say this morning. But as a result of this meeting this morning, the discussion came up after the meeting about excessive use of alcohol, and the subject of the Carson Park issue came up. And it's the data that I presented this morning as part of the county board legislative session is really pertinent here because it does affect us as a community in more than one ways. Liski talked about it from the health department ways, from the health issues, and I look at it as a member of the Finance and Budget Committee for the county in a monetary perspective, and it's a significant thing. But how much of an abuse are we really looking at? In the state of Wisconsin, it ranks number one in the number of binge drinkers. There's 1 million of them that they estimate. Wisconsin ranks number one in drinking intensity. That's 9 drinks per occasion. Alcohol-impaired driving adults exceeds the national rate, 26% to 15% on an average. Wisconsin's annual alcohol consumption is 28% higher than the national average. Disorderly conduct charges are 5 times the national average and rising. the statistics for Wisconsin in 2011 were over 1,500 deaths related to it, over 48,000 hospitalizations, 60,000 arrests, 46,000 treatment admissions, 5,700 motor vehicle crashes. This all adds up to a significant cost to both the state, the government agencies, of roughly $6.8 billion that we can talk, of which about 2.8 of that goes back to the government agencies, whether it's state, federal agencies, county, local. And another 2.8 is delegated to the families. This is money that they don't have to spend on other issues, so it does affect a lot of areas. To give you a little perspective, the Department of Transportation is budgeting $3.6 billion for highway construction this year, so we're spending twice as much on alcohol as we are on highway construction. Eau Claire County had 19 related deaths, and I think Leeske gave you most of these figures already, and that's $169 million that we can delegate or that we can put into the Eau Claire County's cost of this. And we look at that and we see it in our budget. Our county budget for 2014 has $11.7 million in the public safety budget. 50% of our $26 million levy is related to the justice system in some form or another, whether it's human services and all aspects of it, but what gets to it. This is a significant portion that's related to this. Eau Claire County is a recognized leader in making changes to the criminal justice system by addressing the issues that cause the problems. These preventive programs include the TIP program, several courts that are set up for specific crimes, reducing excessive alcohol abuse, preventing early substance abuse, treatment programs, jobs, and education. We as a community do not need any more opportunities for excessive alcohol because we can't afford it. We're on a fixed levy. You're on a fixed levy. Any cost that comes into it that's above and beyond what we normally do is a problem, and we can't afford anymore. So I would suggest that seriously think of changes to the as far as the Carson Park issue is concerned. Questions?
Thank you, Mr. Dunning. I see no questions.
Okay, thank you.
It's a teacher without her toys.
I'm Deb Tackman, and I've been a licensed physical educator and health educator for about 30 years. I've enjoyed every single year of that. I am here in front of you today just to give you some information that might be helpful. What is a standard drink? And put that right there. If you look at what a standard drink is, according to the Center for Disease Control, and it's something that I teach my students, and I didn't even know myself, it would be a shot of 80 proof, or 5 ounces of wine, or 12 ounces of beer. And all of those have approximately a half an ounce of pure alcohol in them. And what Carson Park has is 16 ounces, if I remember correctly. So that kind of gives you an idea of what that is. The National Institute of Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism says that binge drinking, which has been an issue in Eau Claire, the definition for men is 5 or more drinks, and for women 4 drinks in approximately 2 hours or one social occasion. So these would have the same, and this would be more than a standard drink. My second hat that I wear that I love is working with Students Against Destructive Decisions in Eau Claire County at North and Memorial and the other 4 schools in our county. And I just posed the question to them. I said, how would you feel if the Eau Claire Express added fan deck seating in the baseball stadium grandstand, and in this area a person could purchase a ticket that would allow them to eat and drink as much as they would like? And because of time, and you've been sitting for an awfully long time, I'm just going to take one of the responses I think that kind of pulls all of the students together. And this is what one high school student said. In my opinion, the idea of giving people unlimited drinks on platforms like that seems pretty unsafe, on or off the deck. When families go to games like my family, we want to be able to enjoy a family-friendly experience. And it would be difficult to do that if people were binge drinking. And this is the part that kind of got my heart. And she said, it's setting a bad example for many young children that probably attend the games. If kids and teens see the average adult acting that way, they might think it's okay to do the same. Even just putting a limit on the drinks might take away the issues of safety and bad role models. I thought that was pretty insightful from a young high school lady. And there were many other comments, but I want to be short and sweet and do an education piece and be the voice of the kids. So, Deb Tackman, 3007 Short Road. Sorry.
Thank you, Ms. Sackman. I see no questions, so thank you.
Great.
And for your visual aids.
Take them back to my classroom.
Hi, everybody.
Welcome.
My name is Jeannie Pittenger at 2419 Riverview Drive. I could almost say ditto to everything they said because they've kind of taken what I've said. But, you know, one thing I want to point out is Dave said one average for the amount of alcohol taken in. You happen to say another one. But I was calculating what that really came out to. And even at the 4 to 5 of 16-ounce glasses, that averages out to 5 to 6 12-ounce drinks. Legally, they're at least buzzed when they leave that game. And I don't know if you've seen the commercials out there, but buzz driving is drunk driving. There is no difference when you get into an accident. As a parent, I'm going to give you an example of when we went to a Brewers game. And I know some of you guys have heard this, but we ended up in the cheap seats. And my husband said, you do realize, Jeannie, that there's going to be language flying the more alcohol these people take in. And there certainly was. And, you know, I gave them the mom look a couple of times, and it did stop. But they just continued to take alcohol in. They didn't have to spend as much money on their tickets. They had more money to spend on alcohol. And if you allow it to be, to take in as much as they want, they're going to take it in because it's in front of them. And the more alcohol you take in, the less you're aware of the amount that you're taking in. I have teenage kids. I don't let them go to our movies because I don't want them to hear the things that are in there. If you look at the movie ratings, you know, you're not supposed to go to an R if you're 17. Well, language comes out as R the more you take in. I do believe, and I'm using this just as a parent, for a PG-13 you can only use the F-bomb once. So head up to the R range and you're going to be hearing it flying. That's what happens when you have alcohol. So as a parent, I don't want to see that happen. I don't want to see drinks spilled. I don't want to have to sit in a different section with my kids so that we can enjoy it. Even if they're desensitized to it, I'm not. It would really tick me off. And I believe that originally when they put that fan deck out away from the family seating area, it was to prevent the fans from hearing anything that may happen. And even though we haven't had an incident, and thank goodness we haven't had an incident, it's a recipe for disaster when we give somebody unlimited alcohol. They can get in that car and they may say, I'm going to take a cab home, but are they going to remember that if they're by themselves or the other people that they're with are drinking? And I can tell you I would be a very upset parent if somebody left there and slammed into my kids. You'd hear from me more than this. So please just take that into consideration. I'm not against the fan deck. I'm just against unlimited alcohol. As adults, we're supposed to be setting examples for our children. And what kind of example are we setting if we're allowing them to just drink as much as they possibly want? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pittenger. I see no questions. Thank you so much.
Hello.
Hello, my name is Jennifer Eddy. I live at 520 2nd Avenue, and I'm a family physician recently appointed to the Board of Health by you all. So I want to start by saying thank you, and I hope I will earn your trust. And there have been a lot of good points already made, so I don't want to belabor them too much. I was going to only make 2 points, but I just couldn't resist. Can we? This is, whoa. I'm just going to leave it. Maybe you can find it. Okay, this is a map of the United States. Everything that is dark blue is an area of less than average alcohol consumption. Everything that's white is kind of median. Everything that's red is elevated alcohol use, and everything that's really dark red is just out of control. And you can see all of Wisconsin is red, and Eau Claire is in the out of control range. So what we think of as normal, I grew up on the East Coast. I did my medical training in Chicago. What we think of as normal or healthy is not considered that elsewhere in the country. The next slide, if I can turn this for you. This is Eau Claire County specific, and some of you I've spoken to or I've given this handout to, but just this is the cost of excessive or unhealthy alcohol use in Eau Claire County. It's $160 million. Think of what we could spend as a city if we weren't spending that because of unhealthy drinking. And then the one area I wanted to focus on down here is binge drinking, which is responsible for 76% of unhealthy drinking. So in this case, about $120 million in Eau Claire. And you can just see here Eau Claire County's rate of binge drinking compared to Wisconsin, which is already the highest in the nation, and compared to the U.S. as a whole. So when we say this is a problem that's screaming out at physicians and our citizens, and that's why we nominated it as one of our top 3 public health issues. So we really ask you to take that into consideration. I have 2 quick other points, sort of taking off my physician hat. One is I know a lot of people are concerned about over-regulating or telling people what they can and cannot do, and I just want to point out that saying no to this expansion of the liquor license does not in any way inhibit anybody from buying alcohol, drinking alcohol in Carson Park. So just to be clear, this is not about restricting people's freedoms. All this is doing is saying they'll have to go and buy their drinks. And what it does is it removes the incentive by an all-you-can-drink special that gets people to drink maybe more than they intended because they want to get their money's worth. And it also avoids attracting people who are really just looking for alcohol. So I think that is, when it was stated before that perhaps on the fan deck, people consumed 7 16-ounce drinks, whether that is because that was more than they intended or because those people sought that out because it was an avenue for them to get a lot of alcohol. But just to say, you're not restricting people's rights. You're just getting rid of a really unhealthy practice, actually just limiting the unhealthy practice. And the last thing I want to give you, sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 words. I just thought it would be helpful for you to see what exactly we're talking about when we say 7 16-ounce drinks. So and thanks to the person who gave us, showing us what a different drink is. This is what we're saying, or this gentleman said, the average person consumed, the amount of beer consumed on the fan deck. We do not think this is a good idea to expand the area where this is possible. So please say no about the license expansion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Eddy. I see no questions and lots of visual aids tonight. So.
It's also really heavy. Anybody
want it?
Good evening. I'm
Welcome.
Catherine Duax, 2003 Noble Court. They've already said most of everything that I was going to say, but I do serve on the school board, and I work with students from SAD, and I am also on the committee of the Alliance for Substance Abuse Prevention, ASAP, for the City County Health Department. And I was formerly a member of the Baseball History Committee for 6 years because I love baseball. And I want to see healthy athletes in this city. I'm very concerned about this addition to the fan deck. I did a lot of work for the committee. We hosted dinners to build a Hall of Fame plaza, and we sold lots of pot of gold tickets on the fan deck. It's loud out there. We always waited until after the second inning. Everybody knew this. It was kind of a standing joke that we would wait till after the second inning because everybody was pretty loaded up by then and they bought a lot more tickets. So you get my drift on that. Nothing thrills me more than to see all the kids come with their baseball mitts and stand by the Hank Aaron statue and have their picture taken. I think this is what we want to focus on. Good, healthy, fun, clean fun, and families coming out there together. I don't want to hear a bunch of swearing because somebody's drunk. And I don't believe that we should have unlimited alcohol out there just to make a few extra bucks. So I would rather see people come to our beautiful Carson Park and enjoy themselves. And yeah, I believe in good, clean fun. There's nothing wrong with having a beer or two, but purchase it one by one. Don't just bring the keg and sip it up. I am concerned about loud partying out there, taking up some of the seats that were sold for general admission. And we all appreciate the Express, the Cavaliers, and other teams that play out there. Consider that. This is not the property of one person, although we do appreciate everything Mr. Rolette has done to improve the stadium of his own volition. But there are other teams that play out there. I just feel like we're sending the wrong message if we add to the fan deck. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Duex. And anyone else? And anyone else? We've had, Mr. Rolette.
I'm very familiar with the Alliance for Substance Abuse Prevention. I was introduced to them last week when I spoke before the Expanded License Committee. When they approached me about their concerns about overconsumption, it had nothing to do with the fan deck. They assured me their concern was with the new stadium decks. And I asked them at that time, if we have one person up there serving 20 people, do we not have better control in that environment than we would have with 4 or 5 bartenders on the fan deck serving 500 people? And they said, we're only concerned with the stadium decks. And I'm thinking, there's a double standard here. You're asking me to control the limits of people on the stadium decks and leave the fan deck situation as is. Now, if I hear people like Ms. Duex, she's concerned about the fan deck. You know, I'm personally offended to think that we're the target group, the initial target group for this committee. There's no question that when they're done with us, they're going to go after Country Jam. They may go after the ski meet, you name it. They're saying that you can drink to excess as long as you pay for it. I don't buy into that concept. We remind people each and every night that they're at the park that they've got a level of responsibility that they have to adhere to. We don't condone abusive language, although there are fans that think that that's their given right when they come into the park. We don't tell people when they come through the door that they're limited in terms of how much they can eat and how much they can drink. But we do remind them each and every night that they're limited in terms of behavior patterns. And each and every one of our people who are vending alcohol. And they are vending alcohol throughout the stadium, the bleachers. They won't serve people who have been overserved. And if it's a problem, these people are removed from the stadium. And I'm happy to say that that very seldom happens. Now, when they approached us, they said, look, men can drink 4 beers, women can drink 3 beers. Well, you tell that to my wife, that I can drink more than her. I got a world of hurt to deal with there. It comes back to responsible drinking. We recognize that when we cut off the beer on the fan deck in the 7th inning, we're not eliminating their consumption of alcohol. If they choose to go into the grandstand area and watch the last 2 innings of play and want to buy a beer, if we feel that they're capable of consuming that beer, it's going to be sold to them. Doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. You know, when we started our operation for the first 3 years, we played our games at 7 o'clock. And it became apparent to me over that period of time that we were denying people the opportunity to stay to the completion of the game. And there was nothing more upsetting to me than to see a young family get up and leave in the 7th or 8th inning of a highly contested game because it was too late. So we went to 6:30. And I'm happy to say that it's worked well for us. But, and in other areas, you know, the press company went to an early edition of the newspaper. So they've got earlier press times. It's given us an opportunity for post-game interviews with the media, with the 2 TV stations, and with the press company. It gives our younger fan base an opportunity to come down on the field each and every game, run the bases, get autographs from the players, you name it. It's been a positive experience. But it also presents another problem, one that we really can't control. And that's that when we start a game at 6:30 and it's over with by 8:45 or 9 o'clock, we thank people for coming to the park and we remind them to drive safely. And we'll see them tomorrow. And that's our hope. But we're not telling them you must drive straight home. And we certainly are aware of the fact that these people may deviate. They may go to a business partner of ours on Water Street or someplace around town and have another beer or 2 because it's the extension of a social activity. I'm a baseball fan. My dad was a baseball fan, born and raised a block and a half from Wrigley Field, which made me a Cubs fan. That's a cross I've had to bear for 70 years. But the bottom line is when I go to Wrigley Field, I go in there with no limitations on how much I can eat or drink. Now, whether I pay for it or not, that's something that a person individually has to control. All we can do is encourage people to display common sense. Now, I know we've been targeted by this group. I've seen the email, the encouragement of them to send you letters. I understand that. Am I pleased with it? No, but I'll live with it. But at the same time, I understand, and believe me, the reason it was brought to my attention is they've got committee members that are saying, what in the hell is wrong with the Express? What are you doing wrong to infuriate a group like this to come down on you? I don't know. And as I mentioned earlier, Officer Roeder certainly indicated that what we're doing is working. I don't see the problem. I don't think I'm blind as a business person. I certainly look for it. I travel out to the fan deck each and every night. And I don't see people who are out there with the intention of binge drinking. Now, the one thing that we've found, and I think we'll continue to find on these smaller decks, is the more food we can put into these people, the better food that we can put into these people, the less tendencies they'll have to drink.
I see that your 5 minutes has again come to a close, Mr. Roeder.
Thank you.
I have to politely ask you to end your comments. Welcome.
Susan Mock, 1824 Lehman, and I'm a researcher. I don't have a vendetta against the Express at all. I have an interest in listening to what works to decrease the alcohol problem in Eau Claire. And it's not just about university students in Eau Claire. It's about the numbers that we have. And we know that policies that decrease the use of unlimited drinking work to decrease binge drinking. So that's what I'm about. And I would really like us to think about looking at the policy related to unlimited drinking as a way to decrease our numbers in Eau Claire. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mock. That seems to have brought to a close the public hearing on this issue. Anyone else? The chair will then close item 3, and that brings to an end the public portion of our meeting. And we thank those citizens who are in attendance. The council does need to continue its work, and with the announcement of a closed session in which the city will now convene into closed session to discuss public employee collective bargaining matters, specifically current labor negotiations with firefighter local 487, which is permitted in closed session. On a motion by Councilmember Larson, seconded by Councilmember Strobel, to enter into closed session. Is there discussion? There being none, clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Duax.
Aye.
Kincaid.
Aye.
Klinkhammer.
Aye.
Larson.
Aye.
Lewis.
Aye.
Mitchell.
Aye.
Strobel. Von Hayden.
Aye.
Zhang.
Aye.
We will return to your program after a short break. Chippewa Valley Community Television is made possible by continuing community support. If you would like to volunteer or make a donation, you can contact us by calling 715-839-5067 or on the web at www.cvctv.org. The audio for this program can be heard on WRFP LP 101.9 FM. We now return you to your program. This is a rebroadcast of the Eau Claire City Council meeting.
Is your community television.
This meeting of the Eau Claire City Council will come to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Duax. Councilmember Emanuel. Councilmember Kincaid.
Here.
Klinkhammer.
Here.
Larson.
Here.
Lewis.
Here.
Mitchell.
Here.
Strobel.
Here.
Von Hayden.
Here.
Worthman. Zhang.
Here.
Thank you, Madam City Clerk, and welcome everyone to the Tuesday, January 14th, 2014 legislative session of the Eau Claire City Council. During its legislative session, the council deliberates and takes action on the agenda items before us. We have prepared for this duty by working with citizens, by working with staff, and by reading the considerable amount of materials in our packets. And we are ready this afternoon to exercise our responsibility. We welcome those of you who are joining us in chambers and those of you who are viewing on community television or streaming at cvctv.org. We do have important items on our agenda this afternoon, so let us proceed with our agenda, our work, which begins with the consent agenda, items 1 through 15. Council members have questions on any item on the consent agenda?
Question on item 14 and 15?
Councilmember Klinkhammer, did you have a question? Okay. Councilmember Duax? Item a question?
14 and 15.
Okay.
Questions.
Okay. I see the nature of your question, Councilmember Duax.
Just wanting to know what the I wanted to know a little bit more about this quote and storage mezzanine.
Okay.
And then secondly, the robotic total station system. I have some questions about that in terms of.
Okay.
what it can do for us or not
Looks like
do.
Mr. Jensko is coming up to answer.
Well, I'm prepared to talk about the robotic total station. I can't help you much with the one before that.
I see Mr. Draxler here too, so he'll probably help with that one. Do you want to proceed, Councilmember Drax?
Yes. Well, maybe you could just tell us exactly, I understand from the narrative what it does. Have we had one before? Is this something new? Is it going to save us money and obviously a lot of technical or technician work? Why robotic?
Yeah, this is one of the pieces of equipment we use for our survey crews. And we try to replace them on about a 2-year cycle so that each one we keep for about 6 years. This one we've actually had for about 10 years. We've tried to extend the life as long as we can. And it's compatible with the other 2 pieces that we have, which allows us to interchange our crews and makes it more consistent for the data downloads that come in for our designers to use.
So we've had a number of years of experience. Sorry. We've had a number of years of experience.
Yes.
Is there anything new about this technology that makes it more cost efficient in terms of staff time or things like that?
No, it's still the basic stripped down piece of equipment. We don't have all the bells and whistles that you might get with these things, but it's consistent with the other 3. I think the lost staff time would be as if we were to go to a different type of total station. Then we would have to do training, and there'd be a lot of extra costs of doing that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jensko. And the previous.
You had a question on the mezzanine?
Yeah,
Yes, please.
Mr.
Sure.
Pippinger.
Could you just explain kind of what it does?
Basically, the mezzanine is to give us some more surface area for our storage in our shop.
Oh, you mean a mezzanine construction?
Yes.
Oh, I was
So it's-
misunderstanding.
Yeah, that's what it is. It's just basically to give us more storage, and we are actually going to be combining 2 of our areas at shops that we have up in the Parks main. So we're going to bring it down and combine both those, so we gain some efficiencies there.
Okay, well, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pippinger. Seeing no other questions on a motion by Councilmember Lewis, seconded by Councilmember Von Hayden, the consent agenda is moved. And is there discussion? There being none, clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Duex.
Aye.
Kincaid.
Aye.
Klinkhammer.
Aye.
Larson.
Aye.
Lewis.
Aye.
Mitchell.
Aye.
Strobel.
Aye.
Von Hayden.
Aye.
Zhang.
Aye.
And the consent agenda is passed. I do have a proclamation this afternoon regarding Martin Luther King Day, but I wondered, I don't see the person in the audience in chambers who would accept the proclamation. I just wanted to check to be sure. Asking the council's attention, I would like to just read the proclamation as it signifies an important event in our country's history and helps us remember that we do have a local celebration of this event. Whereas federal, state, and local governments, including the state of Wisconsin, Eau Claire County, and the city of Eau Claire, annually observe the 3rd Monday of January as the national holiday celebrating the birth and life of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. And whereas in 1994, the U.S. Congress designated Martin Luther King, Jr. holiday as a national day of service to encourage all Americans to observe the day with appropriate civic, community service, and education programs. And whereas the Eau Claire City Hall and related administrative offices will be closed on Monday, January 20th, not as a holiday for city employees, but to provide an opportunity for city staff to address community service opportunities and participate in diversity training and other in-service educational programs. And whereas commemorating Dr. King's life is not only a tribute to his dreams and contributions to our nation and the world, but also a reminder that every day each of us can play a part in his continuing work. Now, therefore, the City Council and the citizens of Eau Claire do hereby proclaim Monday, January 20th, 2014, as Martin Luther King Jr. Day. in the city of Eau Claire and encourage all residents to join in recognizing this day with appropriate programs in honor of Dr. King's life and his lasting legacy. Signed, Carrie Kincaid. There is a program at St. James Church, is that right? St. James Church at 6 p.m. on Monday, January 20th. And it is open to the public for anyone who may want to join that commemoration. Did I get that right? Okay. Okay. Thank you for indulging that reading of that proclamation. We will then continue with our business agenda with item 16, which is a resolution granting a temporary Class B fermented malt beverage license to Kiwanis Club of Eau Claire, Chad Mickelson, President, for on January 20th, also at Volume 1 for Chamber of Commerce Business After Hours. Mr. Hofer.
Thank you. This is part of the Eau Claire Chamber monthly business after hours networking events. This particular application involves a temporary Class B fermented malt beverage license, or a temporary beer picnic license, as it's sometimes called. We had members of the Kiwanis and Volume 1 in for license review. Mentioned of various expectations, obviously, that they check IDs prior to any beer service, that they make sure there's 2 bartenders present. They maintain safe and responsible beverage services. Post signs at the entrances and exits, letting people know that they can't exit with the beer. Again, this is a pretty regularly held event, and the committee didn't have any objections, and obviously the Kiwanis is a bona fide club that does qualify for the temporary picnic license. I know there are representatives of the Kiwanis here if there are additional questions, but again, the committee didn't have any objections, and it's a pretty regularly held event.
Thank you, Mr. Hofer. Questions by council? Councilmember Duex has a question.
I'm going to ask a general question that would apply in this case, but also to many others we've had. And that is, a number of service clubs have been getting in this operation of bartending, or shall we say, providing that service for other business events. Since they are not directly, it is not directly an event for that particular club, and for the other clubs, how do you interpret that with respect to, in Chapter 125, these so-called picnic licenses? Who can be licensed? In this case, we're licensing the Kiwanis Club, even though the event is on behalf of the Business After Hours, which is a chamber event. How do you interpret that? And again,
how you reconcile that?
Yeah, reconcile those.
Sure. Again, the applicant is the Kiwanis Club, and they are a bona fide club. My interpretation of the statute is because they are the applicant and they do qualify for the license, and have the legal obligations that go along with that, that there isn't anything that precludes them from applying in that situation. Now, I understand your question about, obviously this is a kind of a chamber event, and the Kiwanis is kind of working in concert with the chamber to get that application. I don't know that that has any kind of negative legal implication, and I'm not aware of any case law that says so, but I understand your point.
I appreciate the answer, because I think that's something that needs to be. The question has come up from time to time in the past, and I thought I'd take the opportunity to ask you. You're new on the job.
Sure. And obviously, again, because Kiwanis is applying, they do have all the obligations that come with applying for and receiving that license. They can't just simply apply and then step back and have anyone else stand in their shoes with their responsibilities.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Hofer. I see no further questions. Thank you. On a motion then by Councilmember Zhang, seconded by Councilmember Klinkhammer, item 16 is moved. Discussion on the item? Seeing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Kincaid?
Aye.
Klinkhammer?
Aye.
Larson?
Aye.
Lewis?
Aye.
Mitchell?
Aye.
Strobel?
Aye.
Von Hayden?
Aye.
Zhang?
Aye.
Duex?
And that resolution passes. Item 17 is a resolution approving a request from the Eau Claire Express to add fan deck seating in the baseball stadium grandstand. Mr. City Manager has requested the floor before we begin discussion of this item. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Madam President. I did receive correspondence this afternoon that the Eau Claire Express and Eau Claire Baseball LLC is withdrawing their request for items 17 and 18, so they no longer wish to proceed.
Okay. As the item is published, it does require council action, and the chair would request a motion to postpone indefinitely.
Also move.
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Von Hayden on item 17. You understand that that postponing indefinitely just removes the item from our consideration forever. Until reapplied, perhaps. If they do.
Exactly.
Until they.
Excuse me.
Is that understood?
Yes.
Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. And item 17 is postponed indefinitely. The chair would seek a similar motion for item 18.
So moved.
Second.
Councilmember Von Hayden, seconded by Councilmember Lewis. The same rule applies, and those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign, and the motion carries, and item 18 is postponed indefinitely. That means that the City Council will not be considering those two items tonight. They're withdrawn and removed from our agenda. And that brings council to item 19, which is a resolution approving appointments to various boards, committees, and commissions. As is our custom, I will read into the record the recommended appointments that are recommended by the Appointments Committee to the City Council for its consideration. To the Housing Advisory Board, Paula Stitchen, appointment to fill an unexpired term, which will expire April 30th, 2014. To the Landmarks Commission, Jane Seymour Koenig, an appointment as a real estate representative as required to a 3-year term, which expires December 31st, 2016. To the North Barstow Medical Business Improvement District, Julia Johnson, for an appointment, a 3-year term, which expires in 2016. To the Police and Fire Commission, Stephanie Finn, appointment to fill an unexpired term, which itself expires April 30th, 2017. And to the Transit Commission, Sam Molesky, a new member and UW Eau Claire representative for a 1-year term, which expires August 31st, 2014. And to the West Grand Avenue Business Improvement District, reappointments of John Curtis, Marty Fisher Blakely, and Ann Sessions for 2-year terms to expire in 2015. The council have questions regarding any of these recommendations? Does council?
One question, I believe.
Councilmember Dwex?
One question is, there was one person who was being appointed to fill out a term for the police, I believe it was Police and Fire Commission, and who has resigned?
Sadly, Mr. Sheridan's death opened up a seat.
Sorry.
Oh. Yeah. It's so we worked quickly to fill the commission because it's a small commission.
Yeah.
Okay. Other questions? There being none, then on a motion by Councilmember Mitchell, seconded by Councilmember Duex, item 19 is moved. Discussion. Chair sees none. Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Klinkhammer.
Aye.
Larson.
Aye.
Lewis.
Aye.
Mitchell.
Aye.
Strobel.
Aye.
Von Hayden.
Aye.
Zhang.
Aye.
Duex.
Aye.
Kincaid.
Aye. And that resolution passes. Item 20 is a resolution Oh, am I in the right place? Yeah. A resolution approving the Fiscal Policy Advisory Committee 2014 study topics. This is brought to council by the Fiscal Policy Advisory Committee chaired by Councilmember Duex. Is that correct?
Yes.
And do you wish to speak to your resolution, Councilmember Duex?
Yes, we spent about 3 meetings working on this, November, December, and of course this month in January. We took into account all the suggestions that we had heard internally and also some other council member suggestions. We kind of packaged it together and worked on 3 sets of them. The follow-up and carryover issues, there was a request by council that we kind of look backward at the 3-inch snow plowing policy, so-called 3-inch. Now today might have been just slightly over 3 inches. And so, but we also wanted to look at, we're going to evaluate how effective that was. And by that, we're going to review it and report back. I think perhaps in reading that, maybe that was not stated, but we're going to be reviewing those, and what we would try to do is bring a report back to the council when that's completed. A white-way lighting policy, same thing. And the policy on assessments for special plantings and other amenities has not really, we have not taken that up before. We've taken up the other 2 briefly, but wanted to finish them. So once we get those done, as we get them done, 1 at a time or 2 or 3, whatever, we will be bringing those in early. Then we look at a rather lengthy process for evaluating the budget process. We need to come up with a plan for doing it and timelines, and we want to bring that back by March 15th. We just gave some examples of what that might be. And then secondly, there was a request that we look at fund balances against the annual tax levy and the lapsing funds, non-lapsing funds, and we scheduled that in talking to staff for May 1st. That was deemed to be enough time to be able to do that, bring back those policies. And then a 3-year city council budget review process plan. And that's, again, going to be a longer term thing. We want to develop those policies. So, and there's one error on this toward the end. In doing the cut and paste that we did, it says at the very bottom, it says, these study projects shall be completed and a report presented to the City Council by June 10th, except as otherwise provided. It should have said, except as otherwise provided in 2 and 3, which have earlier dates, except as provided in 2 and 3. And that was what the committee recommended. So if there's any objection, if there's no objection, I would just like to insert sections B2 and B3 in place of section 1 in that resolution.
The chair notes no objection. Okay. Did you have further?
That's it. And so if you have questions, or Monica Lewis and Mr. Larson would be, I'm sure, glad to answer them.
Okay. Council members Larson or Lewis, any points? Okay. Are there questions by council members? Councilmember Mitchell. Or
I guess I don't have a question. Are we discussing?
We're discussing.
Okay. I looked at this and I looked at number 3, and that I'm not sure what it means actually to apply the fund balance against the tax levy, but that wasn't exactly what I had in mind when I asked that we have a discussion about the use of fund balance. So I offered an additional work item that's in front of you that the city clerk passed out. My desire is that we look at the current fund balance. You'll recall when we had the work session, we talked about setting a limit on how much we were going to spend, and we're pretty much at that limit, at least the one that was talked about at the work session. So I think we should talk about whether that is the limit we want And if it is, then what are the implications for borrowing to fund our capital projects? And if we set a limit on that, then what about the capital projects that we want to do? So I just think that we ought to have that discussion, and I think we ought to have it way before May 1st. So that was my request to FISPAC.
Begging the body's pardon, I have failed to move the item, so I will move the item on a motion by Councilmember Duex and seconded by Councilmember Lewis. Now the item is on the floor and discussion can continue. Councilmember Von Hayden.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with what Councilmember Mitchell has. I don't think it fits into the FISPAC policies to do that. I think if we want to have this as a separate work session, that would just be a council work session, rather than something that FISPAC would be taking a look at it. And it would be just for the city manager to schedule a work session to discuss those items, which I think are a good idea, but I don't think it has to be as part of the FISPAC item.
And beg the body's pardon again. Does Councilmember Mitchell wish to move to amend the resolution, or?
Well, may I respond to Councilmember Von Hayden? I absolutely agree with him, and I asked for that at a previous meeting, and I was told that FISPAC was going to be handling it. So I thought this was the only way to have it be done. But I absolutely agree with you. I don't think it has to go through FISPAC either. So I'd be happy to not offer this as long as I can make a directive at the end, and we will do what it says here.
Well,
okay?
We're rather discussing the possibility of an amendment, but I think we're okay. Councilmember Duex?
First of all, again, we discussed this at 3 different meetings. City manager was present, Ms. Nolan was present, and I guess the way we understood it was application of the fund balance. Typically, that's the term you use for determining how much money you want to spend. How much fund balance do you want to apply in order to meet the tax levy that you have? In other words, if you've got a limit on your tax levy, how much fund balance, so that you get a total spending from the general fund. So we thought we'd interpreted that as was presented, and that's why it was presented as it was. And the lapsing and non-lapsing accounts were just another issue that's very similar, and we rolled it into one. I would suggest, even though the resolution doesn't call for a plan, I think I would suggest, if there's a desire of the council to have a work session just to discuss fund balance and corresponding implications for debt and funding of capital expenditures, that maybe that could be added on as a be it further resolved, which does not affect the work plan of FISPAC, but just says, because this is a council resolution, not a committee thing. The committee recommendation is in sections A and B, and so if you have someone wanted to move that as right after the last sentence there, just put be it further resolved that the council shall schedule a work session, et cetera, the language that's there.
The suggestion has been made for a procedure. Councilmember Mitchell?
Actually, I'm satisfied with just making it a directive at the end. So I will not be doing that.
I raise that only because directives that involve council making a decision should be the part of the vote, whereas a directive usually involves a person expressing a preference, which may or not be agreed, but that's why I suggested it that way.
Anyone else can make that motion if they wish, the motion to which you are alluding.
I'll make that motion as I stated. I don't know if the clerk heard me, but be it further resolved that the council shall schedule a work session and then pick up the wording there before March 31st. If the clerk, okay, does it?
The motion has been made. Is there seconded by Councilmember Lewis? Discussion now on a motion to add a further be it therefore resolved as described. Discussion on that motion to amend. Councilmember Strobel?
I think it does maybe make sense. Maybe it's not a directive from one person, but yet a vote of everybody, and if it accomplishes the same thing, I'm okay with it.
Okay. Since the chair would seek unanimous consent to add the last further therefore be resolved. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. The resolution is amended as designated. We're back to the resolution as amended. Is there further discussion? Did you have any? There being no further discussion, clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Larson?
Aye.
Lewis?
Aye.
Mitchell?
Aye.
Strobel?
Aye.
Von Hayden?
Aye.
Zhang?
Aye.
Duax?
Aye.
Kincaid?
Aye.
Klinkhammer?
Aye.
And that resolution passes. Item 21 is a resolution approving a change in the future land use map within the intergovernmental agreement with the town of Washington for property at 5791. Is it Friedeck Road or Friedrich? Friedeck Drive? Anyway, Mr. Tufte gave a nice presentation about this item last night. Any questions for Mr. Tufte? On a motion then by Councilmember Strobel, seconded by Councilmember Larson, item 21 is moved. Is there discussion on the item? There being none, clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Lewis?
Aye.
Mitchell?
Aye.
Strobel?
Aye.
Von Hayden?
Aye.
Zhang?
Aye.
Duax?
Aye.
Kincaid?
Aye.
Klinkhammer?
Aye.
Larson?
Aye.
And that resolution passes. The final item on our business agenda, item 22, is a resolution accepting the existing water and sanitary sewer mains within the Oak Tree condominium plat and the conveyance of a permanent utility easement crossing property owned by Oak Tree condominiums. Mr. Jensko.
I guess this is the first one that's used in the exhibit up here for tonight. This is the map that is in your council packet tonight, and the agenda item is to accept the utilities and the easement within the Oak Tree Condominium Association. The Condominium Association has requested that the city take this over and take over the water line and the maintenance, actually the water and the sewer. The site plan for this and the condominium, well, the site plan was approved in 1995. Construction was in 1996. And at the time, there was no requirement for a development agreement to construct the utilities and for the city to take it over, although all the things were done that we typically would do with the development agreement. The existing utilities in the time were out in Oak Knoll Drive and Forest Heights Drive, where it comes down and turns into Echo Valley. This sewer line was too high to serve these lower units, and so the sewer was brought in and came across and then down, and all the services came off of that. And the water line then came in and paralleled that. Current practice for something like this would be that since it's serving multiple buildings, it would be done under a development agreement, and the city would then take it over. The only difference really is at that time they were not required to do a letter of credit or some kind of financial guarantee to ensure that construction was completed. The city's main concern with what's out there now is that is the health issue of if the line is not properly maintained, and mostly we're talking about the water line. If it's not properly maintained and flushed, then if there's an issue where the water comes back into our system, then that water would be coming back into our system and put them at risk. And if it came back into our system, then other users in that area. So we think that it's important for that reason. They paid the full cost during construction. It was designed by a licensed professional engineer. It was approved by city staff, the construction drawings, and it was submitted and approved by the DNR for water and sewer extensions, which typically is only done for utilities that are intended to be public utilities. So I think there was some thought at the time that that's what it would be. Our crews have inspected the lines, and in 2013, after the condominium association cleaned up some punch list items with some valves that needed repair, determined that it was constructed and met our requirements. and approved and is currently in good condition. They have been paying utility rates as if it was a public line since they came online in 1996. And so I guess those are my main points. The attached resolution before you then accepts the line as a public line and accepts the easement that the line is in. It also has a stub, and I'll go back to this drawing. It also has a stub here that does not have utilities in it. And the reason for that is if we get to the point that we need to reconstruct the water line and not the sewer line, we wouldn't have to go back through the landscaped area. We could just bring it back out to where there's existing utilities in Forsyths Drive. That's the reason for that part of the easement. So having said that, I'll stop. And if there's questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Questions for Mr. Johnson? Councilmember Dwex?
I'm trying to understand why this happened. I mean, wouldn't there normally have been, even if you didn't have development agreements in those days, we're accepting it as if we never owned it.
That's correct. It's been treated as a private line since then.
And there was no agreement?
And there were no easements for it either.
Okay, I'm trying to understand. I know it was before your time probably, John.
Yes.
Why would this have happened and why wouldn't it have been corrected a long time ago? It's been nearly 20 years. I'm kind of dumbfounded. I mean, it just seems like it's so unusual, and I've never had this. I've never even seen this happen before.
I've got an answer.
You were here?
Yeah. It's a condominium plat, and it predates city review of condominium plats. We amended our code to review condominium plats after this 1995 or whatever, and that's why no development agreement occurred. We didn't review the plat.
Huh. How was it reviewed then in those days?
We reviewed a site plan.
That's all?
Yeah, that's all. No condom, no plat.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Okay.
Councilmember Lewis, did you have a? I don't mean to make you ask.
No, that's okay. You had brought up something about the water lines and if they needed to be replaced or contaminated. Is that something that we have a lot of concern for out there, or is it just purely preventative that something could happen out there?
Well, it's mostly preventive. The thing with water lines is we disinfect the water before we put it into the system, and we use chlorine to do that. And chlorine has a residual life. So when you have dead-end lines such as this, if you don't flush the hydrant at the end and move the water through there, then that water can sit out there for a pretty long time. And, these are residences, and they may not have the water demand that you would have from a bigger user, or out in the street where the system's looped, that water is constantly moving through that line and changing over. Here, it wouldn't be doing that. And so, at a minimum, those hydrants need to be flushed. Now, to flush a hydrant, you have to have a special hydrant key because we don't want anybody just going out and turning on a hydrant. The risk to our system is actually if there would be a break in the line and it would create a vacuum that would suck water back into the line. So that's not a very frequent occurrence. And it may not suck the water back, but it's one of the things we like to have that control so we know the water is clean and so that we know that they're having clean water too.
Councilmember Monade.
How often do you flush a line like that?
I just put it on.
Oh, I would defer that to Jeff, but I would guess about every other year, annually.
Thank you.
Councilmember Strobel.
Thank you, Mr. Gettinger. Yeah, whatever, Jones go.
Thank you.
John, sorry. Are we assuming a cost that we didn't have before by doing this? Is this a system that we're going to have to be replacing that we may not have had to, I guess?
Well, the immediate cost that we would assume when we do this is our annual flushing, which is a crew to go out and flush hydrants. So that's a minimal cost. Yeah, we would take over the replacement cost in the future of what that is, but keep in mind that all of these residences are paying utility rates, which includes a component for capital improvement projects and maintenance and that sort of stuff. And so they've been paying for benefit that they've been receiving for the line that they've tied into out here, but not for the line coming through the system. and they've been paying that for 18 years.
And I would agree with what John just said. The benefits outweigh not having this, because we've had a dead end here that we haven't flushed for a long time to keep the disinfection going through and actually making sure that none of the minerals deposited settle out in those lines. So it does help us. And then it also guarantees that those hydrants are maintained, and when they need to be used, they're properly been maintained and they're ready to be used. So.
Thank you. Councilmember Duex?
Maybe this question is for you, Mr. Pippinger. Since we knew this was in existence and we knew we hadn't flushed them and we knew we were charging them rates, and even though they weren't part of an established system, why weren't we flushing them at least if they were paying for it?
Well, again, it's on a private line that we didn't have any ownership of it. What we do have, when condo associations do contact us about that, we will advise them to flush their system.
Oh.
At times, the only problem that you have there is that a lot of those people aren't aware of the proper opening and closing of a hydrant. They can actually cause more harm than good.
Do we have other situations like this around the community that predate, like this did, the review process for condominiums, wherein we have this quasi-private system that we're serving?
I would have to go back and look. There may be some others.
Well, like Washington Heights Sanitary District and the old Corridon Park Water Association, when the city took that over, they took it over as, I believe, city property, and even though it's in the town of, I don't know how that works.
We maintain the town of Washington's water system.
You maintain, and you flush the hydrants and do all that
yeah.
stuff. I see. So that's a little different than this. Okay.
Thank you both. I appreciate your answers. On a motion then by Councilmember Lewis, seconded by Councilmember Von Hayden, item 22 is moved. Is there further discussion? There being none, clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Mitchell.
Aye.
Strobel.
Aye.
Von Hayden.
Aye.
Zhang.
Aye.
Duex.
Aye.
Kincaid.
Aye.
Klinkhammer.
Aye.
Larson.
Aye.
Lewis.
Aye.
And that resolution passes and brings to an end our business agenda. We have one ordinance for action tonight. Item 23 is an ordinance amending the site plan chapter of the zoning code, allowing administrative approval of certain minor site plans. Mr. Tufte helped us through this item last evening. Any lingering questions? There being none, on a motion by Councilmember Zhang, seconded by Councilmember Klinkhammer, item 23 is moved. And is there discussion? The chair sees none and calls the clerk to please call the roll.
Councilmember Strobel.
Aye.
Von Hayden.
Aye.
Zhang.
Aye.
Duex.
Aye.
Kincaid.
Aye.
Klinkhammer.
Aye.
Larson.
Aye.
Lewis.
Aye.
Mitchell.
Aye.
And that ordinance is adopted. The council has before itself a sort of new item this evening called an introduction of options related to direct legislation. And I'll just take a minute to read that into the public record before I call on Mr. Nick. Item 24 is an ordinance sort of for introduction of options related to the petition for direct legislation, which has an A and a B clause, I guess. A reads, an introduction of a charter ordinance requiring that certain building projects constructed with city funds be submitted to referendum prior to construction. And a B clause, a resolution placing a referendum on the April 1st, 2014 ballot regarding a petition for direct legislation. The chair is certain that the council has questions and would appreciate some overview by Mr. Nick, our city attorney. Mr. Nick.
Well, I certainly am happy to take questions. I view it as an ordinance for introduction. If we have questions, if that's council's desire, happy to take them. But generally, we don't take up items on first reading. it's a charter ordinance on for first reading. It's in front of you through a direct legislation petition, but otherwise it's to be acted on much as any other ordinance, with the distinction that, again, instead of a move or a second from council, it's in front of you through the direct legislation petition process. The other distinction when you take it up is that it comes as written by the petitioners and is not amendable, and that so it's an up or down issue on that charter ordinance. Like any other charter ordinance, a 2/3 vote. It would amend the charter, but you do those otherwise. The charter is somewhat akin to our local constitution, so it's a set of ordinances that we keep on our books, but have a higher order of magnitude. And your first issue would be whether you'd want to adopt that outright, which you'd have the right to do. If you do, that ends the process. If not, because it's direct legislation, your next issue, and that's why it's on in that somewhat interesting or unique setting, but it's sort of a required couplet decision, and that would be the decision of whether or not to place it on the next general election, which would be the spring election on April 1st, 2014. That's a resolution action, but again, coupled with the charter ordinance because of its direct legislation nature. That resolution is, like any other, a majority vote or 6 council members to place it on the ballot. So my suggestion to you is it's in front of you for introduction, and per your regular rules of procedure and 2.08 of the code, your typical would be simply to read it in and then take it up next time. If there's a desire by council to actually act upon it, you could, of course, suspend rules and take it up now.
Okay. The chair would entertain a couple questions to clarify. Councilmember Von Hayden?
The only question I have at this point in time, Mr. Nick, is if we follow the normal procedure and act on it at a next meeting, is that in a timely enough fashion to get it on the spring election or the April 1st ballot?
Great question. It is. There was a requirement for filing of 70 days prior to the election. That's been met by the petition group. There was in a 15-day window within which the city clerk had to review that. That's been done and certified as meeting as being sufficient in terms of the signature requirement, and Ms. Austin filed that last week. Council then has 30 days within which to act on that, which takes us through the end of this month and moves a little bit into February, but in terms of timeliness for the ballot, the next meeting would be your time frame. You'd have to hold a special meeting to quite catch the 30-day window otherwise. But next meeting is just fine to both make the spring ballot and to meet the 30-day window under direct legislation.
Thank you.
Councilmember Lewis, a question?
Yes, thank you. Would this require a public hearing on the Monday preceding our next Tuesday meeting?
Mr. Nick?
It does not require it because it's not a zoning matter, which are one of the few items that statutorily require a hearing, but it certainly would be expected. Most ordinances are up for public discussion, if not public hearing. That's part of the agenda setting process, but it would be my suggestion, like other ordinances, that we place it on the Monday agenda for public discussion.
One additional question. On page 35, under the actual resolution, placing it on the ballot, there is a question there under the now therefore be it resolved. That question, was that framed by you in this resolution? Because it is a little bit different than the actual petition that was circulated. That's down in the statement under the be it further resolved. But I'm just wondering, the actual question that gets put on the ballot, where did that come from? Was that something that was written, like I said, by you, or is that something that could be altered in any way?
Mr. Nick?
It was drafted by me. It would have been possible for the petitioners to propose that, and it's one of the tricks of direct legislation. You get what you get, and you have to deal with it. So they didn't propose a question. They didn't propose a concise statement either. So those are drafted by my office in consultation with Ms. Austed as suggestions. It's in terms of the question, it's very close to what the petitioner group put as its title, with the addition of the $1 million clause added in there. That'll be something council should consider. I debated it, frankly, internally, whether to add it and sort of raise this issue. To me, I felt it was an important, a relevant, salient enough provision in the ordinance to make the public aware of it. But then again, there are other relevant points. I mean, it doesn't apply to every project. Petitioners indicated simply certain projects. Well, you certainly could go on and try to define those certain projects, but at some point the ballot question gets too long. The ballot question is ultimately, and how it's phrased, is an issue for council. We're trying to hit is something that reasonably informs an elector what they're deciding. And that's my recommendation, which is quite close to the petition with the $1 million phrase added in.
Your response then is that that question on the top of page 35 can be amended by council.
35 or
Yeah, it's in the resolved in 85. I think it's in the first now there be it resolved, and then the further resolved includes the concise statement.
I guess I have a little different side document which I just copied, so sorry about the page confusion. The question is, which Mr. Nick was just discussing, is at it's at the top of the page, and it says question, colon, and then there's the question, one sentence. We can work on that question.
Correct. There was no question presented with the petition.
Yeah.
And that's not unusual in other direct legislation petitions we've seen, but just when left unpresented. I mean, I think even if it was provided, it would still be up to council to deal with. What's clear in 920, the direct legislation, is you can't alter the language in the ordinance. It just goes without saying exactly how you present the question and how you deal with a concise statement. It's clear that we need them both, but who exactly puts them together is somewhat left unclear. In my opinion, that's a legislative decision for you to make of exactly how you want to frame it, with the objective being to clearly let electors know again what the issue they're voting on is, and through the concise statement what its implication would be if adopted.
Okay, I think we understand that. Mr. City Manager?
Sure. Thank you. I just wanted to reemphasize the point that the statement and the question as it's presented to the City Council is coming from staff. I did have the opportunity to review that, and I believe we also had the League of Wisconsin Municipalities look at that just to make sure that we're phrasing the petition ordinance in a fair and reasonable manner, and we believe we have done that on the draft you have before you.
Councilmember Dwex?
Yes, just a couple of minor ones. On the statement of the charter ordinance, it says, create a new policy for legislative approval of expenditures of $1 million or more on certain capital or building project by shifting final approval from the City Council to the electorate through a binding referendum. Is there a reason for that being expressed that way? I mean, it expresses it as a shifting of it. I'm not denying that it is a change, but just maybe you could explain what nuance was trying to be expressed here. Either one of you.
Mr. City Attorney?
Happy to answer. I mean, I think, frankly, we're starting to get into the substance of it as opposed to an introduction, which is really all it's on for without a motion to suspend. But with your permission, I'll try to briefly answer it. So again, the same point. The language choice ultimately is council's. It's attempting to reflect what is happening, and I think you said it as well. That is what's happening. So it's trying to convey that, whether you call it shifting or changing, I mean, whatever verb you'd like, but it's to try to make clear that it's a process change that's being proposed, a new way in which to approve those certain capital expenditures of over $1 million. And that's the nature of the question for someone, not whether they like a specific project or not, because it's not a specific project-based referendum. And that's one of the key reasons why it's even potentially lawful. If it was, you know, we'd be back to what we were talking about last fall, with it being in conflict with prior specific council actions. But this instead is a charter change altering in some ways the form of local governance in regard to fiscal affairs, of saying some things need to be approved by referendum as opposed to by council vote.
Quick final follow-up. There was some reference to the fact that shoveling snow does that too. There's some question has been raised: how long does a charter ordinance adopted by the electorate remain on the books before it could be amended? I believe there's a statutory, and I didn't bring that along with me. I think there's so many months or years before it can be amended, and then it has to be amended, if I recall correctly, by the electorate. A charter ordinance. A charter ordinance that's adopted by the voters is in place for a specific, or has to be in place for a specific amount of time before it can be amended, and then I believe it can only be amended by the electorate. Would you comment on that?
Mr. Nick, I realize that we are still talking about a procedural matter in the chair's opinion, so I will allow an answer.
That's fine. The important distinction on this one, so two laws that come into effect. One is 9.20, the direct legislation. So whenever there's a piece of direct legislation that's adopted, there is a 2-year window in which council cannot amend or rescind that ordinance. That applies to ordinances. Again, what's being proposed is a charter or a type of local constitutional, if you will, change, or the core laws that govern our procedure. That has a different rule. That implicates the charter statute, which is 660101, under that's the municipal founding chapter in state law. And that indicates that if a charter ordinance is adopted by referendum, that it supersedes all prior and subsequent acts of council. So in essence, it can't be changed. It supersedes prior acts, and it supersedes future acts of council. The way that it would be amended, if at all, would be by a future referendum.
A referendum brought at any time?
The time limitation doesn't clearly apply to that. It may be somewhat of vague in application, but it's not, the 2-year is not repeated in 660101. It just simply says it supersedes all acts of council both before and after. Likely the 2-year under 920 applies, but it's not clear, because what 920 precludes is council changing it within 2 years, and that is not an option anyway under a charter adopted. So I don't think it would apply to a voter altered, referendum altered change, which again would be necessary here. So I don't think there's the time delay window, simply that it would be a charter ordinance beyond alteration by council. You'd have to go back to the voters.
I think we have one more question, Councilmember Strobel.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Nick again. Again on the question on the therefore be it resolved. To me, that just seems a lot more broad than what the petitioners were looking for. And to me, looking at that with a 7-word change, you can get the point of what they were looking for in this legislation for a planned dramatic, musical, or artistic performances. And that would be more specific and would actually point right to what the question was on the referendum versus this, which seems more broad-based. So I guess I'm just throwing that out there.
Perhaps a good point raised, but a good thing to think about and raise and discuss at our next council meeting. Okay. Any other procedural questions? This item then will stand as a first read, a matter of an introduction for tonight's council business. I just read the item. Okay. That brings us to announcements and directives. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you. Just a couple of items to bring to your attention this evening. First of all, relating to the Confluence project, the electronic Eau Claire conversation, the E2C2, is up and running and collecting comments. To date, we've had just under 750 folks look at the site itself. We have a total of just about over 200 responses. Not all of those are participating in the forum, so only 115 responses. You can actually see the responses and the comments. And if you're interested, you can go to the site, and there also has that word cloud that's being formed. And I did set up, just for administrative functions, a closing at the end of January. So there's a number of days still left for comments to be received on that. So administratively, I did put an end at the end of January of 2014 as a closing. So other items that are coming up on Friday, the Chamber of Commerce is having their exit issues. If you're interested, please let Kathy know. It's the State of the County address. And as we had identified, Monday, January 20th, City Hall will be closed, and we will be doing training over, I believe, at one of the establishments in the community to do some in-service training for all of our employees, except for those that are protective services and responding to those type of things. And just another quick item to put on your calendar, if you haven't, the Chamber of Commerce Alliance Chippewa Valley Rally in Madison is on January 29. So you might want to make a note of that as well. Those are the only items I have to report this evening.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. Councilmember Larson.
Yeah, during the budget discussion, we talked about I think we asked for a report on the remaining snowplow funds, and I wonder if at the end of the year, I wonder if we could have that maybe next council meeting.
Councilmember Mitchell.
I have an announcement from the Advisory Committee on Appointments. With Ms. Marol's help, she and I have the materials already for the Advisory Committee on Sustainability. It's out on the committee page. It's being advertised on the website. I think we have 9 citizen resource forms and 10, and you would have seen 8 or 9 of them already in the Friday packet. And so we're planning to meet the first week of February, perhaps the end of the week, and we may make appointments at that time, so the community should know that if they're interested, they need to get their applications in. If we don't have enough to fill all the qualities and qualifications that we have to, then we won't appoint that week. We'll let it go a little further, but I'd really like to get that appointed that week, so I hope people will get their applications in.
A good reminder. Councilmember Klickow.
I will defer to the city manager.
Oh, Mr. City Manager.
I'm so sorry. I know it's probably out of the normal order of business, but Salika is in the audience. I don't know if you noticed that or not.
I did.
I apologize. Snow is not my friend.
We did read the proclamation into the public record, and But I would invite you, if you especially want to talk about the event that you've worked so hard to plan, if you're welcome to approach the podium.
Sorry I'm late.
That's okay.
It's been that kind of day.
Yeah, we understand completely.
This is completely from the community, the university, community members, multiple churches around the area. We have University Lutheran as our lead church, with St. James, the Greater Church, and now the Newman Center is coming on, and some support from several other churches, along with multiple university offices and a number of community organizations. I'm especially thankful to Community Table, have come together to, this is the almost 20th year of the Martin Luther King Remembrance. And our remembrance is unique in Wisconsin and in most of the country in that it is educational, and that instead of having a speaker and a banquet and a choir, we actually read the words of Dr. King, as well as use appropriate music. And this year the emphasis will be on white allies and white martyrs in the movement, because there's a lot of people who don't realize that the movement was interracial. So we'll have a number of pieces of multimedia that involve that, and the importance of nonviolence, because in a world where people have become increasingly divided and increasingly violent, we think to be reminded of that's important. And we are very thankful for the city's support, and especially for this proclamation. So it is January 20, it's next Monday, and we are linked in with Day of Service at 6 p.m., and I'm happy to say Mr. Van Gompel will issue the welcome for us, and the Chancellor will issue the closing for the university. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ducksworth, and thank you for your work on that event, of course.
Thank you.
I think I left some lights on now. Councilmember Klinkhammer.
I will feel remiss if I didn't remark on the Commission for Appointments organization of the breakfast for all the volunteers that serve on our commissions and committees, which was well attended by my fellow council members and much appreciated. It was a good opportunity to interact with many other people that have not necessarily suffered the slings and arrows of an election, but nonetheless have a deep commitment to our community and serve generously of their time on those commissions and committees. So I would encourage the continuance of that endeavor.
It was well received, and it's good. Councilmember Duex.
I didn't want the moment to pass without noticing or thanking our city clerk for her timely handling of these referendum signatures. We've seen enough recalls in recent years that we know the struggles that some cities have had with that. And not only did she get it done on time, but she got it done right and actually early. So I just think we ought to give her a round of thanks for her. We've come to expect very excellent service.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Clerk. Any other announcements or directives? There being none, on a motion by Councilmember Zhang, seconded by Councilmember Strobel, this meeting is adjourned without objection.
This was a rebroadcast of the Eau Claire City Council meeting. This program was recorded and presented by Chippewa Valley Community Television. Chippewa Valley Community Television is made possible by continuing community support. If you would like to volunteer or make a donation, you can contact us by calling 715-839-5067 or on the